Imagine this Europe, the late Middle Ages. A majestic stone castle rises above rolling green hills. Inside, the air is cool and heavy with the scent of wax and cold granite. The flicker of torches dances along the walls. In the great hall stands a knight tall, clad in gleaming armor, ready for a long journey. Ahead lies a crusade, years of absence, danger, and battle. Before him stands his wife, young, beautiful, yet her eyes are clouded with unease. In his hands, the knight holds a strange object, a heavy metal contraption, which he calmly fastens around her waist and locks shut. The key he will wear around his neck, close to his heart, as he rides away, ensuring, so the legend says, her loyalty until his return. It is a scene straight out of a movie. It has been etched into our collective imagination. We see it in films, read about it in novels, and even find it in satirical 19th century postcards and engravings. But here is the twist: this image is mostly fiction. The first mentions of the so-called chastity belt do not come from the dark, brooding 13th century, as many believe, but from centuries later, the 15th. And even then, most descriptions feel suspicious, as if they are not eyewitness accounts, but exaggerated tales passed along for effect. And those medieval chastity belts displayed in museums today, more often than not, they're fakes, 19th century creations designed to scandalize polite society and feed the Victorian obsession with the wicked Middle Ages. In that era, people delighted in shivering at such ideas, feigning shock while secretly savoring the details. So why did the legend take such a strong hold on the public imagination? Because it reflects a deeper, far more uncomfortable truth. In the Middle Ages, the control of a woman's sexuality was absolute and deeply ingrained. For a woman of that time, chastity was not merely a personal virtue, it was a familyless honor, a guarantee of legitimate heirs, and often the very foundation of political alliances. A single lapse could ruin reputations, destroy marriages, and ignite scandals whispered about for generations. In such a climate, the idea of locking fidelity seemed to many not only conceivable, but even reasonable. Whether or not these devices were actually used, the very thought of them was enough to shape myths and feed stories. Historians today suggest that if chastity belts ever existed in practice, they were rare, uncomfortable, and impossible to wear for long periods. More likely, they served short-term purposes, perhaps as punishments or forms of public humiliation. But these remain only theories. And so, the chastity belt lives on, not as cold metal, but as a symbol of control, mistrust, and the fear of dishonor. Like all powerful symbols, it survived the centuries, coloring our vision of the Middle Ages in shades of severity, suspicion, and dark romance. The legend of the chastity belt would be nothing without its sinister, almost theatrical detail, the very mechanics of the device. Picture it, a frame of iron or polished steel, sometimes lined with leather to prevent chafing, though more often left bare and cold against the skin. A wide belt encircles the waist, riveted or hinged, with a narrow strip descending between the legs. The front plate is often perforated with small holes to allow the most basic bodily needs, while the back may be solid or fitted with similar openings. The entire construction locks with a small, deceptively simple padlock or a mechanism of bolts and screws. In drawings and descriptions, these belts vary wildly. Some look like functional restraints, others like grotesque instruments of torture, decorated with intricate patterns or symbols, as though beauty could mask brutality. There are accounts of belts supposedly being made to measure, crafted by blacksmiths with chilling precision. In some tales, keys were forged in pairs, one kept by the husband, the other sealed away in a chest or entrusted to a priest. But if one looks closely, something becomes apparent. The idea that a woman could wear such a device for months or years is deeply flawed. Constant friction would cause wounds, rust, or poor fit could lead to infections. Even the most refined designs would make simple movement difficult, not to mention riding a horse or working in a household. So, if such belts existed at all, their purpose was likely not prolonged prevention of intimacy. They may have been short-term measures, perhaps for a few days, during travel, or as a temporary safeguard in a specific situation. Or they may have been ceremonial, symbolic, a public show of ownership rather than a practical means of control. And yet, in the public mind, these details, the lock, the cold iron, the key dangling from a knight's neck, became more important than reality. It didn't matter whether they worked in practice. What mattered was what they represented: absolute authority over another human being's body. This was a time when women's lives were defined by boundaries set by men. In noble households, marriages were arranged to strengthen political ties, not hearts. A wife's loyalty was not just her husband's private concern, it was a political necessity. The chastity belt, whether real or imagined, was the perfect metaphor for this world, one in which trust was less valuable than control, and love was often irrelevant next to the preservation of lineage. The irony is that much of what we think we know comes from later centuries, an echo of an echo, distorted through art, literature, and scandalous gossip. But like all enduring myths, the chastity belt's power lies not in its truth, but in its ability to evoke emotion, the mix of fascination, revulsion, and morbid curiosity that still grips us today. As the centuries rolled forward, the chastity belt began its slow transformation, not in the smithies of Europe, but in the minds of storytellers, artists, and satirists. Whatever truth may have once existed was gradually wrapped in a thick fabric of myth, embroidered with exaggerations and stitched with the threads of imagination. By the Renaissance, the chastity belt was no longer merely a whispered rumor in noble halls. It had become a provocative image, appearing in engravings, illuminated manuscripts, and bawdy poems. Painters placed it in the corners of allegorical works, as if it were a silent witness to human folly. Etchers carved its likeness alongside grotesque caricatures, pairing the rigid steel frame with smirking husbands, suspicious wives, and lusty intruders caught in the act. The belts themselves, when they appeared, often bore no resemblance to the practical designs that history might allow. Instead, they were adorned with intricate floral patterns, Latin inscriptions, or sharp, menacing teeth, devices clearly crafted to evoke horror or humor rather than actual use. These depictions played into the period's fascination with the bizarre and the moralizing, turning the chastity belt into a symbol of both marital fidelity and human absurdity. As Europe moved into the Enlightenment and then into the 19th century, the chastity belt's presence shifted yet again. Now it lived inside cabinets of curiosities, those eclectic collections of relics, bones, exotic animals, and mysterious artifacts meant to astonish and bewilder guests. It was here, under dim candlelight and behind glass, that the chastity belt's myth took on its most potent form. Travelers spoke of them in hushed tones, writers embellished their histories with lurid details, and Victorian moralists seized upon them as cautionary examples of the barbarism of the so-called Dark Ages. But the irony was sharp. Many of these so-called medieval belts were, in fact, 18th or even 19th century creations manufactured specifically to satisfy the appetite for the grotesque. Some were forged with unnecessary complexity, full of spikes, screws, and locks designed more for display than any conceivable practical purpose. In truth, their craftsmanship spoke more to the theatricality of their makers than to any genuine history of use. Yet the idea stuck. The chastity belt became shorthand for an entire vision of the Middle Ages, a time imagined as cold, oppressive, and merciless, where love was policed with iron and trust was sealed with a key. Alongside dungeons, torture racks, and plague masks, it became part of the cultural toolkit used to paint the medieval world as cruel, superstitious, and alien. And still, the image endured, perhaps because it touched on fears and desires that were timeless. The belt represented the urge to control the body, to bind fidelity with physical force, to remove temptation by removing access itself. It spoke of possession disguised as protection, of devotion shackled by suspicion. In this way, whether real or imagined, the chastity belt remained relevant long after swords and castles fell into ruin. In our own age, the chastity belt survives as an instantly recognizable silhouette in films, literature, cartoons, and even fashion parodies. It has become a symbol that transcends its debated history, embodying the eternal human struggle between trust and control, freedom and security, love and ownership. And perhaps that is the final irony, that a device meant to restrain the body could, in its afterlife as myth, seize hold of the imagination instead. Myths, after all, can be forged as easily as iron, and once they are locked in place, no key in the world can open them.